The shuttle touched down on Nexus Prime with a gentle hum. Kim Hwan pressed his face against the small window and watched as alien creatures moved around the landing pad. Some walked on 4 legs, others floated in the air, and one looked like it was made of crystals that caught the light from the planet's twin suns. Hwan grabbed his backpack and stepped off the shuttle. The air smelled different here, like flowers mixed with metal. He had dreamed of this moment for years. He was the first human exchange student at the Galactic Academy, and he wanted to make a good impression. A tall creature with 8 arms approached him. Its skin was purple and covered in small scales. "Welcome, Kim Hwan of Earth," it said in a voice that sounded like wind through trees. "I am Professor Kethmol. I teach biology here." Hwan bowed politely, the way his mother had taught him. "Thank you for having me, Professor. I am very excited to be here." Professor Kethmol's large eyes blinked slowly. "Yes, we are all very curious about humans. You are the first of your kind to study with us. Please follow me to your dormitory." They walked through the academy grounds. The buildings were made of a white material that seemed to glow from within. Students of different species moved between classes. Hwan saw creatures that looked like walking trees, others that seemed to be made of gas, and some that had too many eyes to count. Many of them stopped to stare at Hwan. He smiled and waved at them, but most quickly looked away or hurried in the other direction. Hwan thought they might be shy. "Your dormitory partner is Veltar," Professor Kethmol explained as they walked. "He is from the Silnari system. His people communicate through light patterns, but he has learned to use our translation devices. Please be patient with him." They stopped in front of a building that looked like a giant flower. Professor Kethmol touched a panel beside the door, and it opened with a soft sound. Inside, the walls glowed with a warm light. "Room 247, the professor said, pointing down a hallway. "Veltar is already there. Classes begin tomorrow morning. Your first class is Advanced Xenobiology with me." Hwan thanked the professor and walked to his room. The door opened when he approached it. Inside, he found a crystalline creature about his own height sitting by the window. The creature's body was made of what looked like clear blue glass, and patterns of light moved through it like slow lightning. "Hello," Hwan said. "I am Hwan. You must be Veltar." The lights in Veltar's body flickered quickly, and a small device on the table made a sound. Then it spoke in a nervous voice. "Yes, I am Veltar. Welcome, human Hwan. I have prepared the sleeping area for you." Veltar pointed to one side of the room, where there was a bed, a desk, and a storage unit. Everything looked normal to Hwan, though the bed was a bit too soft when he sat on it. "Thank you," Hwan said. "This is very nice. I brought some things from Earth to share if you would like to see them." Veltar's light patterns flickered faster. "That is kind of you. But perhaps later. I should warn you that many students here are nervous about humans." "Nervous? Why?" Hwan asked, unpacking his clothes. "We have heard stories," Veltar said. The translation device made his voice sound worried. "They say humans come from a dangerous world, that you eat unusual things." Hwan laughed. "Oh, that is silly. We just eat normal food, rice, vegetables, fish, meat. Nothing strange at all." The lights in Veltar's body went very dim for a moment. "Fish? Meat? You consume other living creatures?" "Well, yes," Hwan said. "Do you not eat meat on your world?" "No," Veltar said quickly. "My people absorb energy from light. Most species here eat plants or energy or minerals. Very few eat other creatures." Hwan found this interesting. "What about the professor? What does he eat?" "Professor Kethmol eats fungi that grow in caves, but they are not alive when he eats them. They are specially prepared to be safe." Hwan nodded, though he did not really understand the difference. On Earth, everything they ate had been alive at some point. Plants were alive too, were they not? The next morning, Juan woke up early. Veltar was already awake, sitting by the window and absorbing light from the twin suns. The patterns in his body moved slowly and peacefully. "Good morning," Juan said. "I am going to get some breakfast. Would you like to come?" Veltar's lights flickered. "I have already eaten. I have absorbed energy. But I will come with you." They went to the Academy dining hall. It was a large room with tables of different shapes and sizes for different species. Juan looked at the food options. There were glowing liquids, crystalline chunks, and various colored powders. Nothing looked like food to him. "Is there anything more solid?" he asked a food service robot. "You may request special dietary requirements," the robot said. "What do you normally consume?" "Rice, vegetables, maybe some fish or meat," Juan said. Several nearby students turned to look at him. A gaseous creature at the next table quickly moved away. "I am sorry," the robot said. "We do not prepare deceased creatures for consumption. This is against Academy policy for safety reasons." Juan frowned. "What am I supposed to eat then?" Veltar's translation device spoke up. "Perhaps you could bring food from your own culture for a presentation?" That gave Juan an idea. "That is perfect. Thank you, Veltar." Later that day in advanced xenobiology class, Professor Kethmol made an announcement. "Students, as part of our cultural exchange program, each species will present their traditional morning meal to the class. This will help us understand different dietary needs and cultural practices." The class looked around at each other. There were about 20 students from different worlds. "I would like to volunteer to go first," Juan said, raising his hand. The room went very quiet. Professor Kethmol's 8 arms moved nervously. "Are you certain, Juan? Perhaps you would prefer to observe first?" "No. I think it would be good for everyone to learn about human food," Juan said with a smile. "I will prepare a traditional Korean breakfast for everyone to see." Veltar's light patterns were flashing so quickly they looked like a strobe light. Around the room, other students were making quiet sounds of worry. "Very well," Professor Kethmol said slowly. "You may present tomorrow morning. Class dismissed." As the students left the room, Juan heard them talking in worried voices. Some of them looked back at him with what he thought might be fear in their eyes. "Veltar," Juan said as they walked back to their room, "why does everyone seem scared? It is just breakfast." Veltar was quiet for a long moment. Then his translation. Device spoke in a very small voice. "Because, Juan, we have heard what humans call breakfast, and it sounds like the stuff of nightmares." Juan woke up before the twin suns rose on Nexus Prime. He was excited about his presentation and wanted to prepare the perfect Korean breakfast. He had brought ingredients from Earth in special containers that kept them fresh. Veltar was still, sleeping, or at least resting. His crystalline body was dark except for a few dim lights that pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. Juan tried to be quiet as he gathered his cooking supplies. The dormitory kitchen was small but had everything he needed. There was a heating unit, a cooling unit, and clean water. Juan set up his portable communication device and called his sister back on Earth. Nari's face appeared on the screen. She was eating lunch in Seoul, 12 hours ahead of his time. "Juan! How is the Academy? Are the aliens nice?" "Everyone is very interesting," Juan said, "but they seem worried about human food. I am making breakfast for my class today to show them it is normal." "That is a great idea," Nari said. "What will you make?" "I was thinking kimchi jjigae, some grilled mackerel, rice, and maybe myeokguk. Simple Korean food." Nari nodded. "Perfect. That will show them real Korean culture. Make sure the kimchi is the good kind, the one grandmother made." Juan smiled. He had brought a container of their grandmother's kimchi, aged for 6 months until it was perfectly sour and full of flavor. I have it right here. Good! Make them understand that Koreans know how to eat well, Nari said. I have to go back to work now. Good luck. The screen went dark, and Juan began cooking. First, he opened the container of kimchi. The smell filled the kitchen immediately, sour, spicy, and rich with fermented vegetables. To Juan, it smelled like home and comfort. He heard a sound behind him and turned to see Veltar in the doorway. The lights in his body were flashing quickly in patterns Juan had learned meant alarm. Good morning, Veltar, Juan said cheerfully. I am preparing breakfast. Would you like to watch? Veltar came closer, but stopped several feet away. What is that smell? His translation device asked. Kimchi, Juan said, stirring the red vegetables with a spoon. It is fermented cabbage, very healthy and delicious. Fermented. Veltar's lights went dim. You mean rotting? Juan laughed. No, not rotting. Fermented. We let good bacteria grow in it for months. The bacteria eat the sugars and make it sour. It is full of life. Veltar stepped back so quickly he almost fell over. Full of life? You eat living things? Well, the bacteria are alive, yes, but they are good for you. They help your stomach work better. Veltar's body was now flashing so brightly that Juan had to squint. The translation device was making worried beeping sounds. Do not worry, Juan said. It is perfectly safe. My family has been eating this for generations. He continued cooking, adding the kimchi to a pot with water and some pork he had brought. The meat sizzled as it hit the hot surface, and Veltar made a sound like breaking glass. That was a creature, Veltar said. A living animal. It was a pig, Juan said matter-of-factly. Very tasty and full of protein. Do you want to see the fish? Fish? Veltar whispered. Juan pulled out a whole mackerel from his cooling unit. Its silver skin gleamed under the kitchen lights, and its dead eyes stared at nothing. I will grill this. Fish is very good for the brain. Veltar made that breaking glass sound again and backed toward the door. You hunt creatures and consume their flesh? Well, I did not hunt this one. I bought it at the market. But humans do hunt sometimes. Juan began cleaning the fish with a sharp knife. My uncle catches fish in the ocean with his boat. The lights in Veltar's body were now moving so fast they looked like a tornado. Other aliens in the dormitory were gathering in the hallway outside the kitchen. Juan could hear them talking in their various languages, but he was too focused on cooking to pay attention. He seasoned the fish with salt and put it on the heating unit. The smell of cooking fish joined the sour smell of fermenting vegetables. To Juan, it smelled wonderful, like breakfast at his grandmother's house. Now for the soup, he said, pulling out dark green seaweed. This is miyak. It grows in the ocean. Veltar was now pressed against the far wall of the kitchen. The ocean? Where the fish lived? Yes, exactly. We harvest it and dry it, then rehydrate it in hot water. Very nutritious. Juan soaked the seaweed until it expanded into long, dark strands. My mother made this for me every birthday. He put the seaweed into a pot with water and some beef broth he had brought. The dark soup began to bubble and steam. More aliens had gathered in the hallway. Juan could see a gaseous creature that seemed to be wearing some kind of breathing mask, and a large furry being that kept making nervous growling sounds. Are those your friends? Juan asked Veltar. They can come in if they want to watch. No, Veltar said quickly. They are concerned about contamination. Contamination? Juan was confused. This is just normal food. Very clean and healthy. He continued cooking, humming a song his mother used to sing. The rice was steaming perfectly. The kimchi stew was bubbling with rich red broth. The fish was getting crispy and golden, and the seaweed soup smelled like the ocean. As he worked, Juan explained each step to Veltar. The fermentation process breaks down the cell walls of the vegetables and creates beneficial acids. The heat denatures the proteins in the fish and makes them easier to digest. The seaweed provides minerals from the sea. With each explanation, Veltar seemed to get more upset. His lights were now so bright and fast that other aliens in the hallway were covering their eyes or moving away. "Almost done," Juan said happily. He opened another container and pulled out more fermented vegetables, radish kimchi, fermented soybean paste, and pickled garlic. "These are banchan side dishes. Each one is aged differently for different flavors. The smell in the kitchen was now a mixture of fermented vegetables, grilled fish, and seaweed soup." To Juan, it was the perfect breakfast smell. To the aliens watching from the hallway, it apparently smelled like a biological disaster. Juan began packing everything into containers. "For transport to the classroom, this will be perfect," he said to Veltar. "Everyone will understand that human food is normal and healthy." Veltar's translation device was making so many worried sounds that it was hard to understand. Finally, it managed to say, "Juan, I think you should know that news of your breakfast has spread through the Academy network." "Oh, good," Juan said, not understanding the tone of worry. "Maybe more students will come to watch." "Yes," Veltar said faintly. "The entire Academy knows about it now, along with the emergency medical team, the hazard response unit, and several xenobiology researchers." Juan looked up from his packing. "Why would they be interested?" Veltar's lights dimmed to almost nothing. "Because, Juan, what you call breakfast, the rest of the galaxy calls biological warfare." The Academy's main auditorium was packed. Word had spread through every dormitory, every class, and every faculty meeting about the humans' breakfast presentation. Students who normally avoided each other were sitting together, finding safety in numbers. Juan walked through the corridors carrying his containers of food, completely unaware of the panic he was causing. Students pressed themselves against the walls as he passed. Some covered their breathing apparatus. Others activated personal shields. "Good morning, everyone," Juan said cheerfully as he entered the auditorium. "Thank you for coming to learn about Korean breakfast." The auditorium was silent except for nervous sounds from various species. Juan looked around and saw more students than he had ever seen before. There were gaseous beings wearing thick filtration equipment, tree-like creatures with their bark pulled tight around them, and several species he had never seen before. Professor Kethmol stood at the front of the room. All 8 of his arms were moving nervously, and his purple skin had turned a lighter shade. "Juan," he said carefully, "perhaps we should discuss your presentation first before you begin." "No need, Professor," Juan said, setting his containers on the presentation table. "I have prepared everything perfectly. Everyone will understand Korean culture much better after this." In the front row, a gaseous being named Zin-Ara was wearing triple filtration equipment. She normally communicated through scent, but today she had activated an emergency translation device. Next to her, a massive furry creature named Horth was stress-shedding all over his seat. Dr. Yexalim, the head of xenobiology, sat in the back row with several recording devices. She had been studying human dietary habits since Juan arrived, and the data was deeply concerning. Humans consumed other living creatures, cultivated bacterial colonies, and showed no fear of biological contamination. "Students," Professor Kethmol announced, "remember that this is an educational presentation. Please remain calm and observe proper safety protocols." Juan was confused by this statement. "Safety protocols? It is just breakfast, Professor." "Yes," Professor Kethmol said weakly. "Just breakfast." Juan opened his first container. The smell of fermented kimchi immediately filled the auditorium. The reaction was instant and dramatic. Half the students covered their breathing apparatus. Several gaseous beings completely dispersed. A crystalline creature in the third row began ringing like a bell in distress. "This is kimchi," Juan said proudly, holding up a piece of the red fermented cabbage. "It is cabbage that has been fermented for 6 months with beneficial bacteria. The bacteria break down the plant cells and create a complex flavor profile." The translation devices throughout the auditorium were struggling with the concept of intentional fermentation. Most of them output phrases like controlled decomposition and bacterial cultivation for consumption. Dr. Yeksalim was taking frantic notes. In her research, she had learned that humans deliberately exposed themselves to bacterial colonies to build immunity. This suggested a species that lived in constant biological warfare and had adapted to survive contamination that would kill most other life forms. The fermentation process, Juan continued, creates beneficial bacteria that help with digestion. My grandmother always said that good kimchi should be alive with healthy microorganisms. The word alive caused another wave of panic. Veltar, who was sitting in the front row to support his roommate, was flashing so rapidly that he looked like a broken light fixture. Horth, the large furry creature, had never encountered a predator species before. His planet was peaceful, with no creatures that hunted others. Watching Juan casually handle what appeared to be biological weapons while smiling was triggering every instinct he had for danger. "Now," Juan said, opening the second container, "here is the main dish, kimchi jjigae with pork." The smell of fermented vegetables mixed with cooked meat hit the auditorium like a wave. 3 more students fainted. A plant-like being in the corner began dropping leaves in shock. "I cooked this with meat from a pig," Juan explained. "Pigs are very intelligent animals on Earth, but also very delicious. The meat provides protein and fat for energy." The casual way Juan discussed consuming intelligent creatures made him sound like the most dangerous predator in the galaxy. Dr. Yexlim noted that humans apparently ranked their prey by intelligence level and chose to consume the smartest ones. Professor Kethamol was trying to signal to Juan to stop, but Juan was focused on his presentation and did not notice. "This soup," Juan said, opening the third container, "is miyok guk. It is made with seaweed from the ocean and beef broth." The dark, murky soup looked like something that had crawled out of a swamp. The smell of ocean plants mixed with dead animal products created an odor that most aliens associated with decay and death. "Seaweed is very healthy," Juan continued. "It grows in the same water where fish live and die, so it absorbs many nutrients. And the beef broth is made by boiling cow bones for many hours until all the minerals dissolve into the water." Several students were now openly weeping. The idea of dissolving bones for nutrients sounded like something from their worst nightmares. Zinara, despite her filtration equipment, was detecting chemical compounds in the air that her species associated with biological warfare. The fermented vegetables were releasing acids. The cooked meat was producing proteins that had been denatured by heat, and the seaweed soup smelled like everything that had ever died in an ocean. "And finally," Juan said, opening the last container, "here are the banchan, or side dishes. Each one is prepared differently." He showed them fermented radish, aged soybean paste, pickled garlic, and several other items that had been deliberately exposed to bacterial cultures for weeks or months. "This soybean paste," Juan said, holding up a dark brown substance, "is fermented for over a year. The longer it ages, the better it tastes. Some families have soybean paste that is decades old." The idea of deliberately aging food for decades sounded like long-term biological weapon development. Dr. Yexlim was beginning to understand why the Galactic Council had been so nervous about first contact with humans. Juan looked around the auditorium with a bright smile. "Would anyone like to try some? Korean food is best when shared with friends." The silence that followed was so complete that the ventilation system sounded like a roaring wind. Every alien in the room was pressed back in their seats as far as possible. Some had activated personal shields. Others were preparing to run. "No volunteers?" Juan asked, genuinely confused. "But it is really very good. Let me show you how to. Eat it properly." He picked up a piece of kimchi with his fingers and put it in his mouth. The crunching sound echoed through the silent auditorium like breaking bones. Several more students fainted. "See?" Juan said happily, chewing the fermented vegetables. "Perfectly safe and very delicious." At that moment, the Academy's emergency alert system activated. Red lights began flashing throughout the building, and an automated voice announced, "Biological contamination detected. All students report to designated safe areas immediately." Juan looked around in confusion as students began evacuating in panic. "Where is everyone going? I have not finished the presentation yet." The emergency lights cast red shadows across the auditorium as students fled in panic. But Juan stood calmly at the front, still holding his container of kimchi, completely confused by the chaos around him. "Wait!" Juan called out. "You have not tried the food yet. Korean culture believes in sharing meals." His words had the opposite effect he intended. The remaining students moved faster toward the exits. The concept of sharing what they perceived as biological weapons made Juan sound like he was planning to infect the entire academy. Professor Kethamol was trying to evacuate the auditorium, while also keeping an eye on Juan. His 8 arms were moving in patterns that indicated extreme stress to those who knew his species. "Juan," he called out, "perhaps you should put the food away now." "But nobody has tasted it yet," Juan said. He opened the container of kimchi jjigae wider so the smell could reach more people. "Food is meant to be eaten, not just looked at." The smell of fermented vegetables and cooked meat hit the remaining aliens like a physical blow. Zinara, the gaseous being with triple filtration, completely lost her form and had to be collected by emergency equipment. Her species had never encountered anything that could penetrate their protective filters. Dr. Yexlim was still taking notes from her position near the back exit. She watched as Juan showed no signs of distress, despite being surrounded by what should have been lethal biological agents. This confirmed her theory that humans were the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever encountered. "Look," Juan said, to the few students who had not yet escaped. "I will show you how safe it is." He picked up a spoon and ate a full bite of the kimchi stew. The sound of him chewing the fermented vegetables echoed through the nearly empty auditorium. To the remaining aliens, it sounded like he was crunching through bones. Horth, the large, furry creature, had been too shocked to move. He sat frozen, in his seat, watching as Juan consumed what appeared to be decomposing plant matter mixed with the flesh of dead animals. His species had evolved on a world where everything was peaceful. They had no concept of predators or biological warfare. "See?" Juan said, swallowing the stew. "Very tasty and very healthy. The fermented vegetables help your stomach, and the meat gives you energy." He moved to the container of grilled fish. The mackerel lay there with its silver skin crispy and its eyes clouded white from cooking. Juan picked it up with his hands and began eating it, starting with the head. The crunching sound of fish bones being chewed was too much for Horth. The peaceful giant finally broke from his shock and ran for the exit, making sounds of terror that his translation device could not even process. "The bones are full of calcium," Juan called after him helpfully. "Very good for your teeth." Professor Park Sun-ho, the human cultural liaison, had been contacted by emergency services. She was running through the academy corridors toward the auditorium, trying to understand what had gone wrong. The emergency report said something about biological contamination and a human with weapons of mass destruction. Meanwhile, Juan had moved on to the seaweed soup. He lifted the bowl to his lips and drank deeply. The dark, murky liquid looked like swamp water to the few aliens still watching. The fact that Juan was consuming it without any protective equipment suggested he had built up immunity to toxins. that would kill normal life forms. Miyok is perfect for breakfast, Juan said, wiping his mouth with his hand. It has minerals from the ocean and vitamins from the seaweed. My mother made this for me every birthday because it helps you grow strong. Dr. Yexlim was frantically calculating the biological impact of what she was witnessing. Humans apparently consumed oceanic plant matter that had absorbed who knows what from the water where dead creatures decomposed. They then referred to this as health food and gave it to their young to promote growth. Veltar was still in the front row, his crystalline body flashing so rapidly that the light was making him dizzy. He had been Juan's roommate for several weeks and thought he understood humans. But watching his friend casually consume biological warfare agents while humming happily made him realize he knew nothing about human nature. Veltar, Juan said, noticing his roommate's distress. Are you feeling okay? You look flashy. The translation device struggled with Juan's concern. I am processing what I am observing, Veltar managed to say. Oh, you are just hungry, Juan said with a smile. Here, try some kimchi. It is really good for you. He held out a piece of the fermented cabbage toward Veltar. The sour, red vegetable dripped with bacterial cultures and fermented juices. To Veltar, it looked like liquid death. No, thank you, Veltar said quickly, backing away. My species does not consume that type of substance. Are you sure? Juan asked. It has probiotics, good bacteria that help your digestive system. Very healthy. The casual way Juan discussed bacterial consumption made it clear that humans regularly expose themselves to microorganisms as part of their daily routine. Dr. Yexlim noted that this explained why humans showed no fear of biological contamination. They were already carrying it around inside them. Professor Park arrived at the auditorium just as Juan was opening another container of banchan. She saw the nearly empty auditorium, the emergency lights flashing, and her fellow human standing calmly in the middle of what appeared to be a biological hazmat situation. Juan, she called out, what is happening here? Professor Park, Juan said happily. Perfect timing. I am giving a presentation about Korean breakfast, but everyone keeps leaving before they can try the food. Maybe you can help explain that it is safe. Professor Park looked around at the few remaining aliens, all of whom were pressed against the walls as far from Juan as possible. She looked at the containers of traditional Korean food, which smelled perfectly normal to her. Then she looked at the terror in the aliens' eyes and began to understand. Juan, she said carefully, I think there might be some cultural misunderstandings happening here. Misunderstandings? Juan asked. But I explained everything clearly. I told them about the fermentation process, the beneficial bacteria, the aged ingredients, the meat preparation. What is confusing about that? Professor Park closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, she saw Dr. Yexlim approaching with what appeared to be a full hazmat team. Dr. Yexlim, Professor Park said, I think we need to have a conversation about human dietary habits and how they might be perceived by other species. Indeed, Dr. Yexlim said, her voice muffled by protective equipment. We have been observing what appears to be the most dangerous feeding behavior in galactic history, and he wants to share it with others. Juan looked between the two professors, still holding his container of fermented vegetables. Dangerous? It is just kimchi. My grandmother made it. She lived to be 93 years old eating this every day. 93 years? Dr. Yexlim whispered. The bacterial exposure should have killed her in days. How long do humans live while consuming these biological agents? Oh, we usually live about 80 to 100 years, Juan said proudly. Some people think the fermented foods help us live longer. The hazmat team took several steps back. A species that not only survived biological warfare, but lived longer because of it was beyond their understanding of galactic biology. In the distance, alarms were still ringing throughout the academy. The emergency had automatically contacted the Galactic Health Authority, who were now preparing to quarantine the entire planet. Juan looked around at all the concerned faces and protective equipment. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked quietly. Academy security arrived in full protective gear, looking like they were prepared for a chemical weapon attack. Their leader, Commander Voss, was a multi-eyed creature from the Rigel system who had dealt with many dangerous situations. But nothing had prepared him for a human with breakfast. "Professor Park," Commander Voss said through his helmet's communication system, "we need to contain this situation immediately. The biological readings are off our charts." Professor Park looked at Juan, who was still standing peacefully with his containers of Korean food, completely unaware that he had triggered a planetary emergency. "Commander, I think there has been a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Dr. Yex Lim stepped forward, her protective suit making crinkly sounds. "We have documented evidence of biological warfare agents, controlled bacterial cultivation, decomposition of organic matter, consumption of deceased intelligent creatures, and exposure to oceanic toxins." Juan finally began to understand that something was seriously wrong. "Excuse me," he said politely, "but are you talking about my breakfast?" "Breakfast?" Commander Voss's multiple eyes focused on Juan with horror. "You call biological warfare breakfast?" "It is not biological warfare," Juan said, getting a bit frustrated. "It is kimchi, grilled fish, and soup, normal Korean food that millions of people eat every day." "Millions?" Dr. Yexalim whispered. "There are millions of humans consuming these agents daily?" "Well, yes," Juan said. "Actually, billions. Korean food is popular all over Earth now, and we have been eating fermented foods for thousands of years." The hazmat team took several steps back. The idea of billions of creatures regularly consuming biological weapons for thousands of years was beyond their comprehension. Professor Park realized she needed to explain human dietary evolution to the aliens before this situation got even worse. "Commander Dr. Yexalim, may I suggest we move this discussion to a more controlled environment? I think I can help everyone understand what is happening here." "That would be wise," Commander Voss said. "The Academy is currently under full quarantine. The Galactic Health Authority has been notified, and 3 nearby star systems have activated their biosafety protocols." Juan's eyes went wide. "3 star systems? Because of my breakfast?" "Your breakfast," Veltar said, his lights flashing weakly, "has been classified as a potential extinction event." They moved to a conference room where Professor Park could explain human biology to the alien faculty. Juan was asked to sit behind a protective barrier, which made him feel like he was in prison. His containers of food were sealed in containment units. "The first thing you must understand," Professor Park began, "is that Earth is what we call a death world. Almost everything on our planet can kill you if you are not careful." Dr. Yex Lim was taking detailed notes. "Please explain Death World." "Our planet has predators, poisonous plants, dangerous bacteria, extreme weather, and natural disasters. Humans evolved to survive in this environment. What Juan calls breakfast, we call survival food." "Survival food?" Commander Voss asked. "Fermentation was developed because fresh food spoils quickly on Earth. By deliberately cultivating certain bacteria, we could preserve food for months. The bacteria we use are beneficial to human digestion." Dr. Yexalim was calculating rapidly. "So humans developed biological agents as a survival mechanism?" "Exactly. And over thousands of years, our digestive systems adapted to not just tolerate these bacteria, but to require them for optimal health." Juan spoke up from behind his barrier. "That is why my grandmother lived so long. Good bacteria in fermented food helps your immune system." The alien faculty exchanged worried looks. Professor Park continued her explanation. "The fish and meat Consumption developed because plant foods alone were not always available. Humans are omnivores. We eat both plants and animals to survive. But the humans spoke of intelligent animals, Dr. Yexlim noted. Pigs with intelligence. Juan nodded. Pigs are very smart. They can learn tricks and recognize their names, but they are also very tasty. The casual way Juan discussed consuming intelligent creatures made several faculty members leave the room. Professor Park sighed. On Earth, intelligence does not determine what we eat. It determines how we treat animals while they are alive. We try to be humane, but we also need protein to survive. Commander Voss was trying to process this information. So humans developed on a world so dangerous that they had to consume biological agents and hunt intelligent creatures just to survive? That is a simplified but accurate description, Professor Park said. Dr. Yexlim looked up from her notes. Professor Park, are all humans capable of surviving these biological exposures? Yes. Human children are exposed to fermented foods from an early age to build their immunity. Adults can consume bacteria levels that would kill most galactic species. Children? Dr. Yexlim's voice cracked. You expose your young to biological warfare agents? Juan spoke up again. My mother gave me miyokguk every birthday since I was 1 year old. It helps you grow strong and healthy. Your mother deliberately poisoned you annually as a growth enhancement? Commander Voss asked in horror. It was not poison, Juan said, getting upset. It was a birthday tradition. She made it with love. The aliens in the room were beginning to understand that humans were far more dangerous than they had originally thought. They were not just capable of surviving biological warfare, they gave it to their children as birthday presents. Professor Park realized she was making things worse. Perhaps I should explain that humans do not consider these foods dangerous. To us, they are comfort foods. They remind us of home and family. Comfort foods, Dr. Yexlim repeated slowly. Humans find comfort in biological agents. When you put it that way, it sounds worse than it is, Professor Park said weakly. At that moment, alerts began coming in from across the galaxy. News of the human breakfast incident had spread through the galactic communication network. Several species had activated emergency protocols. The peaceful garden worlds had requested immediate evacuation assistance. The High Council of Herbivores had called an emergency session. Commander Voss received a message on his communication device. The Galactic Council has been informed. They are sending a biological warfare specialist to assess the threat level. Threat level? Juan asked. I just wanted to share Korean culture. Veltar's translation device spoke up from across the room. Juan, I think your culture might be more frightening than you realize. Professor Park looked at the reports coming in. 3. Planets had requested military protection from humans. The gentle beings of Altair had offered to take in refugees from any world that might be visited by humans. The Crystalline Collective had begun researching ways to shield their homeworld from biological contamination. This is getting out of hand, Professor Park muttered. Juan stood up behind his barrier. Can I say something? Commander Voss nodded carefully. I understand that my food seems scary to you, but I have been eating it my whole life, and I am perfectly healthy. My family is healthy. My whole planet is healthy. Maybe the problem is not that human food is dangerous, but that everyone else in the galaxy is fragile. The room went completely silent. The idea that the entire galaxy might be biologically inferior to humans was not something anyone wanted to consider. Dr. Yexlim slowly put down her pen. You think we are the weak ones? Juan shrugged. I do not mean to be rude. But if you cannot eat fermented vegetables without protective equipment, maybe your species needs to get stronger, not weaker. Commander Voss made a sound like escaping air. The most terrifying thing about humans, he realized, was not that they were dangerous. It was that they were dangerous and they did not even know it. 3 days later, the Academy was still under quarantine. Professor Park and Dr. Yeksalim had been working around the clock to create a comprehensive report about human dietary habits for the Galactic Council. Juan had been moved to a special containment facility, though he was treated more like a guest than a prisoner. The Galactic Council's biological warfare specialist, Dr. Temvara, arrived on a heavily shielded ship. She was a tall, thin creature with silver skin and 4 arms, each ending in delicate hands that could detect chemical compounds by touch. "I have reviewed the preliminary reports," Dr. Temvara said as she entered the Academy's main conference room. "I must meet with the human directly." Professor Park led her to the containment facility where Juan was staying. He had been provided with a comfortable room, entertainment systems, and his own cooking equipment so he could prepare familiar foods. The cooking area was sealed behind multiple barriers. "Hello," Juan said politely when they arrived. "Are you here to try Korean food too?" Dr. Temvara studied Juan through the protective barrier. He looked perfectly normal, 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head. But according to the reports, this ordinary-looking creature could survive biological exposures that would kill every other known species. "I am here to understand your dietary requirements," Dr. Temvara said. "Please explain why humans consume biological agents." Juan sat down across from her with the barrier between them. "We do not consume biological agents. We consume food that happens to contain beneficial bacteria. But why do you require bacteria? Because our ancestors discovered that fermented foods last longer and taste better. And over many generations, our digestive systems evolved to work better with these bacteria." Dr. Temvara made notes on a portable device. "Your species adapted to require biological agents for optimal health?" "I suppose you could say that," Juan said. "But we adapted to many things. We can eat plants that are poisonous to other animals. We can drink alcohol, which is technically a poison. We can eat spicy foods that would burn the mouths of most creatures." "Your species consumes poison for pleasure?" Juan laughed. "When you put it that way, it sounds bad. But yes, many things we eat would be dangerous to other creatures. We just do not think of them as dangerous because they are not dangerous to us." Dr. Temvara was beginning to understand the scope of the problem. Humans had evolved on a world so dangerous that they had developed immunity to things that the rest of the galaxy considered deadly. What other foods do humans consume that might be considered dangerous? Juan thought for a moment. "Well, we eat mushrooms, which are fungi. Some mushrooms can kill you, but we learned which ones are safe. We eat raw fish, fermented milk, aged cheese with mold, spicy peppers that cause pain, bitter plants that contain toxins." Dr. Temvara was writing frantically. "Your species regularly consumes fungi, raw flesh, rotted dairy products, toxic plants, and pain-inducing chemicals." "You make it sound much worse than it is," Juan said. "To us, these are delicious foods. Sushi, yogurt, blue cheese, hot peppers. They add flavor and variety to our diet." Professor Park arrived with additional data. "Dr. Temvara, I have been researching human dietary evolution. The situation is more complex than we initially thought." "Please explain," Dr. Temvara said. "Humans evolved as persistence hunters. They would chase prey animals for hours or days until the animals collapsed from exhaustion. This required enormous amounts of energy, which meant humans needed very dense nutrition." "They hunted by exhausting their prey?" Dr. Temvara asked in horror. "It was very effective," Juan said proudly. "My ancestors could run for days without stopping. Very few animals could escape humans who really wanted to catch them." Dr. Temvara was realizing that humans were not just biologically dangerous. They were also terrifyingly persistent predators. Furthermore, Professor Park continued, Earth's changing climate meant that humans had to adapt to eating whatever was available. Plants, animals, fungi, fish, insects, anything that provided nutrition. "Insects?" Dr. Temvara whispered. Oh yes, Juan said. Crickets are very tasty when roasted, high in protein and very crunchy. Many cultures still eat insects regularly. Dr. Temvara set down her writing device. Your species consumes arthropods. For recreation? Not recreation exactly, food, though some people do enjoy the crunch. Over the next week, Dr. Temvara conducted extensive interviews with Juan about human dietary habits. She learned about fermented fish sauce, aged meats, raw eggs, live oysters, fermented dairy products, and dozens of other foods that would be classified as biological hazards by galactic standards. But she also learned something else. Juan was genuinely confused by the fear his food caused. To him, Korean breakfast was a normal, healthy meal that reminded him of his family. He had no idea that his comfort food was terrifying to other species. Dr. Temvara, Juan said during one of their conversations, I want to apologize for scaring everyone. I never meant to cause trouble. You did not know, Dr. Temvara said. Your species simply evolved differently than the rest of us. But why did the rest of the galaxy evolve to be so sensitive to biological agents? Dr. Temvara thought about this question. Most species evolved on stable worlds with abundant resources. We did not need to develop immunity to biological agents because we were never exposed to them. Your world was so dangerous that you had to become dangerous just to survive. So we are the strange ones? No, Dr. Temvara said slowly. You are the strong ones. The rest of us are the weak ones. Eventually, Dr. Temvara submitted her report to the Galactic Council. Her conclusion was that humans were not deliberately dangerous. They were just adapted to survive conditions that would kill most other species. They posed no direct threat to other species, as long as proper precautions were taken. The Academy was finally allowed to reopen. New protocols were established for human dietary needs. Juan was provided with a sealed cooking area and air filtration systems to contain the smells of his food. Slowly, some of the braver alien students began to approach Juan again. They were fascinated by his stories of Earth and the incredible adaptations his species had developed. Veltar was the first to visit Juan in his new cooking area. He stayed well outside the safety barriers, but he watched as Juan prepared simple rice and vegetables. Juan, Veltar said, I want to apologize for being afraid of you. You do not need to apologize, Juan said. I understand now that my food really is dangerous to other species. I should have been more careful. But you were not trying to hurt anyone. You were trying to share your culture. Yes, but I learned that sharing culture requires understanding differences first. Dr. Yex Lim established a new research program to study Death World adaptations. She was particularly interested in how humans had developed such strong immune systems. Several alien medical schools requested information about human dietary bacteria for potential therapeutic applications. 6 months later, Juan had become something of a celebrity at the Academy. Students from across the galaxy came to observe the human who could survive biological warfare for breakfast. He gave lectures about Earth's dangerous environment and how humans had adapted to survive. The cooking club he started had very strict safety protocols, but it was extremely popular. Alien students could not eat human food, but they were fascinated by the preparation methods and the cultural stories behind each dish. Juan called his sister Nari to update her on his progress. So, they understand Korean food now? Nari asked. They understand that it is terrifying but not malicious, Juan said with a laugh. I have learned to appreciate how incredible our food really is. We are the only species in the galaxy that can eat fermented vegetables and call it a healthy breakfast. What will you teach them next? Juan grinned. I was thinking about Korean barbecue, but Professor Park says I should wait at least another year before introducing the concept of cooking meat at the dinner table. In the background, Veltar's lights began flashing rapidly, and what Juan had learned was his species' version of nervous laughter. The galaxy was slowly learning that humans were not monsters. They were just survivors from a world that made monsters out of anyone who wanted to live. And sometimes, the most terrifying thing about monsters is that they do not even realize they are dangerous. But they were also learning that monsters could be kind, generous, and eager to share their culture, even if that culture happened to involve biological warfare for breakfast.